Our guest is the pastor of First Baptist Church in Dallas. Big news over the weekend at an event after introducing Rick Perry. Went into the lobby of the hotel, was interviewed by a number of members of the media, and made the statement that...
And the Southern Baptist Convention, which is the largest Protestant convention in the nation, has labeled Mormonism as a cult. And so we need to understand it is not Christianity. It is not a branch of Christianity. It is a cult. Now, he's a good, moral family man, Mitt Romney. But you know, it was the first...
All right. Pastor Jeffress, Article 6, Paragraph 3 refers to a religious test. And let me read that because I know you were asked about it on Chris Matthews last night. It says, the senators and representatives before mentioned and the members of the several state legislatures and all executive and judicial officers, both of the U.S. and of the several states, shall be bound by oath or affirmation to support this Constitution, but no religious test shall ever be required as a qualification to any office or public trust under the U.S. Your thoughts on that?
Well, you know, it's been interesting how many talk show hosts have actually cited that to me as if saying that for private citizens to use a religious test is unconstitutional or even illegal.
Oh, I think they're wrong in so doing.
Well, obviously, Article 6 refers to no government-imposed religious test, and we all agree with that. Anybody ought to be qualified to run for any office regardless of his religion. But there's nothing wrong and perhaps everything right with individually our considering a candidate's faith. You know, it was John Jay, the first Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, the author of the Federalist Papers, who said, quote, "We have as our duty and privilege in this Christian nation to prefer and select Christians as our leaders." And so if I'm a bigot, like Bill Bennett said, for suggesting that we ought to prefer Christians over non-Christians, if I'm a bigot, then I'm a good company with John Jay, the first Chief Justice of the Supreme Court.
You know, when you hear references, Pastor Robert Jeffress of First Baptist Church in Dallas, when you hear references to the separation of church and state, I think a lot of people don't understand what was meant by that. And some people think that means that Governor Perry cannot attend a prayer vigil. It means that you cannot have a public profession of faith by an elected official. Does that bother you that to some extent that has silenced Christianity in this country?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, somehow people think that we surrender our First Amendment rights somehow in certain context. And I just really believe that and I'm talking to evangelical Christians, that we have every responsibility to try to elect Christian competent leaders. You know, people have been talking about the Martin Luther supposed comment, "I'd rather be ruled by a competent unbeliever than an incompetent believer." Well, why do you have to choose between those two? I mean, right now, why don't we work to try to choose both a competent leader and a committed Christian as a leader? That's what this primary process is all about. If you're a Republican, and if you're a Democrat, man, stick with your candidate. But we need to find, as Christians, I believe, the best Christian competent candidate we can. I mean, think about this. If we're engaged or on the brink of a nuclear war, I mean, you want somebody competent with their finger on the button. But if all other things are equal, wouldn't you rather have somebody who's being led by the Holy Spirit of God in making that decision than someone who isn't? There is a reason that Christians are preferable to non-Christians as our leaders.
And using that as your filter or your construct or your basis, your qualification list, who's your candidate?
Well, I have privately, in a public setting, endorsed Rick Perry right now, and I understand other Christians disagree, and that's fine. Everybody's in this free country can choose whomever they would like to have. So, you know, again, I'm not a politician or a pundit. I'm a pastor. I felt like, as a personal and private citizen, that it was time to get involved in the process and do whatever I could to help elect a godly leader to govern our country. And I'm very much and still enthusiastic about Rick Perry. Some people have asked me, well, what do you think about Governor Perry disagreeing with you about Mormonism being a cult? I said, that is absolutely fine. Just because I endorse Rick Perry, I don't expect Rick Perry to endorse everything I say or believe.
Do you believe that the separation of church and state has, to some extent, silenced pastors on speaking
Oh, I absolutely, and I hope you will have me back in January. My new book, Twilight's Last Gleaming, is coming out, and I talk just about that subject in one of the chapters in the book. Yes, a faulty understanding of the separation of church and state, and also intimidation by these left-wing groups like the ACLU or Americans United for Separation of Church and State. Oh, if you say this or say this, you'll lose your tax-exempt status. Did you know there is not one church in 50 years that has ever lost its tax-exempt status?
Right. No.
Not one. So pastors, quit being wimps and stand up and talk not about political issues, but the moral, spiritual issues that are affecting our country.
Pastor Robert Jeffress is our guest. Just a minute more. He's the pastor of First Baptist Church in Dallas. I noticed, Pastor, we were talking off air, when I was running for office, I could go to churches where the membership was black and the pastor was black, and they would openly talk about politics. They would endorse candidates. They would inform voters who they were going to vote for, who they believed would do a good job for the community. And then you would go to all or predominantly white churches, and they would not let you speak. They would not mention politics. They would not mention who they thought. And they had this fear. And I noticed, you know what, that alters a certain balance in the political process that some churches.
Oh, absolutely. It does, and I think people can debate legitimately the propriety of endorsing candidates, not the legality, but the propriety of doing it. I said to my church Sunday, you know what, it doesn't matter. There is no political litmus test for being a member of First Baptist Church Dallas. I don't care if you support Barack Obama, Ron Paul, Mitt Romney, Rick Perry. We are politically diversified, but we are unified in our faith in Jesus Christ.
Seems reasonable enough. Last question for you. When you look at the administration of Barack Obama, you see a man that professes to be a Christian and yet encourages abortions, a number of what might be considered unchristian beliefs, his seeming love affair with Islam, declaring that this is not a Christian country. Your thoughts on his administration?
Well, I'm very disappointed in him. I'm not one of these who goes around saying Barack Obama is a Muslim or whatever. I take him at his word that he's a Christian. But, you know, this is not the only criterion that we use to select a candidate. I think another question is that I talk about in my book is, does the candidate govern by biblical principles? And that's why I said I'd rather support Mitt Romney, who at least plays like he is supporting life and not abortion, rather than Barack Obama, who is the absolute most pro-abortion candidate in the history of the United States. So I think, yes, we need to be concerned about how a politician's belief affects his behavior, and I think we need to call him out if it's inconsistent. And with Barack Obama, there is tremendous inconsistency with his Christian faith and especially his record on the issue of life.
30 seconds. I promise last question, but there's one more. When you hear the preachings and teachings of Jeremiah Wright making the news, what do you say that a man in a pulpit says those things?
Well, I think Jeremiah Wright is going to have to answer to God for what he's preached, just like I'm going to have to answer to God for what I preached. And so, you know, and I would make this comparison. You know, some people have tried to turn me into Rick Perry's Jeremiah Wright problem. Listen, Rick Perry has never been a member of my church. He's never listened to one of my sermons. He has no idea what I believe about anything. But, you know, Barack Obama sat, I think, for 20 years in that church.
Indeed.
And so I think there's a whole different standard there.
I think you're right. Pastor Robert Jeffress of First Baptist Church in Dallas, thanks for being our guest.